So, what would happen if Godzilla from the 1954 film was to suddenly pop up within the My Hero Academia universe at the time when All Might was at essentially his peak? Would All Might be able to stop the King of the Monsters from burning Tokyo to the ground, or would Godzilla just destroy him along with everything and everyone else? To find out, I'm going to be breaking this down into a couple categories, those being durability, physical strength, speed, reaction speed, attack potency, and overall abilities. Starting off with speed, this one's kind of obvious. Obviously, Godzilla is the slower of the two when it comes to overall travel and even mostly combat speed. Though reactions is a bit trickier to find out. When it comes to just moving in general, All Might is obviously the faster of the two. The guy can jump across cities even while outside his prime, whereas Godzilla takes pretty extended periods of time to walk across Tokyo. Though in the water, Godzilla is significantly faster than he is on land, All Might is still consistently the faster of the two by a pretty significant margin. Even characters a lot slower than him can consistently move at speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. So, yeah, I think All Might should take this first category pretty easily. As for reaction speed, this one's a lot closer, as both of these two have potential FTL to even higher arguments, but for Godzilla, the FTL ones are the only ones I'd really use, as the ones that get him higher rely heavily on cross-scaling him with future timelines and stuff like that, which I won't be using here besides one example, as pretty much the entirety of the timelines he would scale to are not only pretty different from each other, but have scaling that doesn't really make sense given the context of the 1954 film, given that a lot of these weren't even made by the same people and are kind of just doing their own thing, using the 54 film as a kind of origin point, but not a basis for the scaling of the verse. So the only example of this I will be using is the 1955 film, as a lot of the people that worked on the 54 film also worked on the 1955 film, and this film is a direct sequel to the 1954 film, unlike the other ones, which are technically direct sequels, but take place way, way further down the line, whereas this one's like right after it. I will be using the 1955 film also because a lot of the lore for that film is technically considered canon to the 1954 film to a degree, so I feel like that's fair to use, but the other examples like early Showa era, early Heisei era especially, and even some of the Millennium era stuff, no, I'm just not going to use those. But off the 1954 film alone, Godzilla really doesn't have any impressive reaction speed stuff, like, at all. You could kind of argue he could sort of react to the military weapons firing at him, but if he can, he's just relying on his durability to tank everything instead of actually dodging it. But if you use the 1955 film, then he would just scale directly to Anguirus, as all Godzillas within the context of that film, including the original, as that's actually kind of brought up, would scale to and just all the Anguiruses, and the Anguiruses are all kind of relative to each other, so the Anguirus in that film wouldn't necessarily be a special one. And that one can dodge the atomic breath, which is a beam of pure radiation, or a kind of flame of pure radiation. Regardless, it should be traveling at light speed, as is specifically called Chernivtsi radiation, which can hit speeds around light speed, or at the very least very close to it. And Anguirus can dodge and react to those speeds. So Godzilla, who can match him in melee combat, should be in the same tier of speed. Granted, it's not like this is how he's always reacting. This is like the highest possible, and you can get him off the original two films. And even then, there is arguments that Anguirus could have been kind of aim dodging. I don't think that he's aim dodging every time that he manages to avoid it. But you can also argue that he was just aim dodging, which would kind of debunk this whole thing. But given that these two species went to war for like a while, it's more likely that he can actually dodge and at least react to the atomic breath, which would put Godzilla only relativistic to potentially FTL levels of reaction speed. As for All Might, his stuff's a lot more clear-cut. He can just straight up perception blitz people who can already dodge lasers, as well as lightning and electricity, stuff along those lines, which would already put him in the FTL to relativistic, even FTL plus on the higher end. Characters on his level, at least the level of Prime All Might, are already capable of reacting to light-based attacks as well. We see this multiple times. And just a lot of stuff in My Hero Academia has scaling to at least approaching the relativistic to FTL range. And All Might, even while severely nerfed and not in his prime anymore, is already above the vast majority of that. So I think it's pretty fair to assume that he has speed within the relativistic at bare minimum, all the way up to FTL plus. At the highest possible end, very low into MFTL, but for this, I'm going to keep him in the FTL to FTL plus range, as I feel that's the most consistent with the series itself. If this was a race or like a battle that completely hinged on reaction speeds, obviously All Might would win pretty easily. But now it's time to get into the actual overall attack, AP, destructive capacity, all that type of stuff, starting with physical strength. Godzilla, just by his size alone, is already at the lowest of low balls in the large building range of power, but obviously he gets a lot higher than that. There's a statement that pretty much implies he could destroy mountains with his tail, which would obviously put him at mountain level to even island level, depending on how powerful you think his tail swipe is and how it destroys the mountain. Most likely somewhere in the mountain plus ranges, in my opinion, as they claim he could do it in a single tail swipe, which would imply he does it pretty fast and with a lot of fragmentation. So that's fairly impressive for a casual attack. We can assume that his physical strength does sort of scale to his atomic breath, which I'll get into later once I start talking about the actual like overall power and then the overall abilities. But his atomic breath does have feats that get well above mountain level, so you can potentially argue him all the way up to like the island ranges to at the highest possible edge continental, which is really impressive, but Mike can pretty easily match that, even while in his nerfed state at the start of the series, holding back to not kill everybody in a city, and fighting a relatively weaker villain that he probably also didn't want to kill instantly with a single attack. He was capable of hitting with large mountain levels of energy, and was basically the context of this is he punched so hard he caused a vortex that brought in a nearby thunderstorm. Most calculations get this anywhere from, I think the lowest I've seen is very low on mountain level. The highest I've seen is all the way in island level, but the most consistent ends I've seen is the large mountain level calc that I have up right now. In his prime, he pretty much states that he'd be at least 60 times stronger in general, and this is a holding back punch, by the way, so he would be significantly over that in physical strength. And then there's also a feat from Deku that he basically just blatantly would upscale that can get all the way up to the multi-continental ranges, if not even higher, depending on what calcs you use, but the most consistent is in the multi-continental range. So when it comes to physicals, even with the cross-scaling with Godzilla's atomic breath, unless you use kind of just arguing that Godzilla's atomic breath should scale to his durability, which I'll explain later why that's not true, All Might would just blatantly be the physically stronger of the two by a pretty significant margin in his prime. Now to attack potency, All Might would just kind of upscale everything I just said, as he can basically just get above that by being stronger than Deku was when he did that feat. The highest I'd ever put All Might with that in mind would be very low in the moon level. I wouldn't go any higher than that, as I feel that would be pretty inconsistent with the series itself. There are arguments to get him all the way into the planetary ranges, unironically, but I just don't find them very consistent. Though there are some people that do, but I'm just not going to use them here, as he's not going to really need them, as Godzilla's arguments that also get him to the planetary ranges are similarly not great. As for Godzilla, his atomic breath has a couple different calculations, ranging from island to approaching country to even up into multi-continental at the highest end. Country range and country plus seem to be about, well, large country seem to be about the most consistent arguments that you could find for it, as I feel island is a little too low given how they calc it, and multi-continental is just way too big of a jump for an attack that realistically shouldn't be anywhere near there. So I'd say the most consistent and you can get Godzilla's AP is in somewhere in the country range of power. Not really into continental yet, but well above island levels. When it comes to durability, these two would just blatantly scale to their own AP, obviously, but to different degrees. All Might would obviously just scale and probably upscale by a little bit his highest arguments for physical strength, which would be in the multi-continental to very low moon level ranges off more consistent ends, which is extremely impressive. But Godzilla does have arguably better arguments, but they are kind of built on a shaky concept. And that is the Oxygen Destroyer, which has pretty much in every calculation you could find multi-continental level energy per second, which is obviously a lot, and Godzilla endured it for a pretty extended period of time. At the highest end, you can argue, if you consider how long Godzilla was actually enduring it, and then add on the energy outputs per every second he was in there, or however long you think it takes for the Action Destroyer to produce multi-continental levels of energy, because there's different arguments on that. You can get it all the way up to small planetary at the highest possible end. However, I don't think that really works. My main argument for why I don't use this chain scaling for his durability ever is because it just doesn't make sense. He didn't endure it, he still died. So it's not like he took the full small planetary energy and was fine. So it wouldn't scale to his durability by default. He would scale to a fraction of that. And he doesn't even scale to a fraction of that without being injured, as it was still causing extreme pain to him. You could see that pretty obviously in the film. This is ignoring that every single second that it was producing that energy, it was still hurting Godzilla. He was still taking damage, so it's not like he no-selled it or anything. So sure, you could argue he take a lot of damage on the multi-continental levels to even moon levels and not die, but I'm not going to pretend that he didn't, get destroyed by the Oxygen Destroyer. He should not scale to the full energy output over extended periods of time, ignoring that's not how durability scaling in general works. As unless you survive attack that's hitting you repeatedly with tons of energy, you shouldn't really scale to it. You shouldn't scale to stuff that's going to end up destroying you. Even if Godzilla got out halfway through the Oxygen Destroyer, he would still have gotten severe injuries from it, and was already getting severely weakened by it. It's not like he got hit with like an energy beam and was fine afterwards, but was slightly injured, so you just calculate energy output per second of the beam. This attack killed him. Godzilla died. It's like if you were in a radiation chamber and it took like, let's say, 2 hours to kill you. Would you scale to every single ounce of radiation to hit you in those 2 hours? No. It's like when Cell was getting hit with Gohan's Kamehameha. Would you scale him to every single second of energy output that Kamehameha produced? Probably not, because it, killed him. That's my argument here. I don't think Godzilla should scale to the full energy output of the Oxygen Destroyer in any way, shape, or form. And even if he did, it would only be for his durability, not his AP, like some people try to say it does. As even up into the Heisei eras and Millennium eras, as well as the early Showa and late Showa, and obviously this film and the 1955 film, which is pretty much canon to it for the most part, well, in that timeline, Godzilla does not scale to his own durability in terms of AP. His durability is always higher than his AP. This is consistent with most versions of Godzilla. It's always been his durabilities above his AP. That's what it's always been. Now to the final category, overall abilities, or just arsenal, basically. And this one definitely goes to Godzilla, as Godzilla just has a lot more stuff up his sleeve than All Might does. All Might's main power is just he has superhuman stats. He has superhuman strength, superhuman speed, superhuman hearing, and potentially even superhuman sight. Reactions, stuff like that. He's just a human on, like, super steroids. That's what he is. Obviously, he shows some level of, like, I don't want to say wind manipulation, as it's really not, like, aerokinesis or anything, but it is same idea, where he manipulates wind to do things, but he's doing that through, like, sheer force, kind of like how Hulk's thunderclap works, where it's just the sheer force of his movements do it. So he has some like air-based manipulation stuff, but it's not based in any type of superpower or anything. It's just based in his raw AP and how he's like moving. It's kind of like a skill, not a overall power or anything. Whereas Godzilla passively is just emitting stupid amounts of radiation that can kill people just by being near him. He's pretty consistently shown to be able to absorb tons of energy, and that's mainly radiation. So even stuff like light, he would just absorb. His atomic breath's obviously extremely powerful. He's also able to regenerate to a, like, not insane degree, but he still does have a healing factor, as most Godzillas have that to some degree. Plus, he has, like, basically unlimited energy. He's just, like most Godzillas, he produces his own energy through nuclear fission within him. So he's essentially producing an infinite amount of stamina, so it's very unlikely you'd ever get him to be tired. The only way you could even get Godzilla to kind of be like incapacitated outside killing would be knocking him out. Or if you had something that can overpower his energy, like the rapid regeneration of energy or even infinite energy, like the bacteria that they used on Heisei Godzilla that one time, but obviously All Might doesn't have that. So when it comes to overall abilities, Godzilla does have a lot more. This is ignoring that he also has a lot of the same stuff All Might has, just through being a giant kaiju. He has also superhuman strength, decently superhuman speed, potentially superhuman senses since he's an animal, so his sight, smell, hearing is probably better than the ordinary human, especially since he's based on a Tyrannosaurus Rex, which had way better senses than a human. Obviously, it's based on the older interpretation of one, which we didn't know had that yet, but it should be the same general idea. He's still closest to something like a theropod dinosaur than like a reptile, or at least he's a midpoint between the two. So when it comes to abilities, Godzilla does take that, as well as potentially taking durability. I would actually just blatantly say Godzilla probably takes durability, but it's not a stupid gap. But that's the only two categories Godzilla really takes here. Is that enough to give him a win here? Well, no. When it comes to a fight between these two, in character, All Might is going to be pretty focused on saving people in Godzilla's path of destruction. So Godzilla likely wouldn't even be targeting All Might right off the bat, as he's going to be more focused on potentially other heroes or the military. If this was a 1v1 fight, All Might would be 100% focused on Godzilla. But for this is an in-universe example of how a fight between the two would go during All Might's prime. If Godzilla was getting annoyed by other heroes, the second he starts fighting back, All Might's going to realize pretty quickly that this guy is a pretty big threat and is going to have to step in himself. And once that happens, he's going to rely a lot on his speed and evasion to basically just overwhelm Godzilla. Godzilla's atomic breath can definitely hurt All Might. I don't know if it would be enough to kill All Might, as more consistent calcs for it only landed in like the country plus levels at best. There is calcs, like I mentioned earlier and showed earlier, that can get in the multi-continental. Those ones aren't the most consistent and aren't really the best, but if you do argue those levels of power for Godzilla, he could potentially beat All Might if he did get a couple good shots on him. But All Might's speed kind of saves him here, as remember, he can perception blitz people that can already arguably dodge the atomic breath in terms of like reaction speed. And depending on what calculations used for both of their APs and durabilities, All Might would still probably possess the physical strength required to at least damage Godzilla, as he's in the same tier as the Oxygen Destroyer is most consistently. Yes, the Oxygen Destroyer damages things in a different way than All Might, but the energy output's still on the same level, and there's nothing to suggest Godzilla couldn't still be hurt by that level of energy, even without the conventional durability negation that the Oxygen Destroyer has. And yes, depending on which calcs used for Godzilla's atomic breath, Godzilla could definitely hurt All Might as well, just as easily. But no matter how you slice it, All Might is definitely landing a lot more hits than Godzilla is in this fight, due to the massive speed difference as well as the size difference. Godzilla's going to have a lot of trouble pinpointing a target that's significantly smaller than him, and moving potentially hundreds or thousands of times faster than him, depending on which calcs you use for him. Whereas All Might's going to have a lot easier time hitting a giant target that's right in front of him and is struggling to keep up with him, and also has to attack from a range, as Godzilla's physical strength is not really doing much to All Might. All Might could also use basically hit and runs, where he could go leave the battlefield for like a couple seconds and then come flying back, as he can basically jump across cities. And Godzilla would have absolutely no counter to that. All Might could definitely outskill Godzilla here pretty easily. And even if you do use the higher arguments for Godzilla's durability, which, as I already explained, shouldn't really be used, but even if you do think he does have small planetary durability, he still would take damage from multi-continental stuff, as it's a huge plot point of the film, and that's actually a plot point in the scaling for that level of durability. You know, the very thing that kind of makes that calc kind of weird. Even if you did argue he has durability in that level, which he doesn't, All Might would still likely possess enough power to knock Godzilla unconscious. There's no reason to suggest Godzilla couldn't be knocked unconscious. Other versions of him with very similar anatomies, and even ones that are, at least lore-wise, related to this one, have been knocked unconscious before. So, overall, I think if you use lower ends for Godzilla, and I'm going with just consistent ends for All Might through this, lower ends, Godzilla is just getting obliterated. Mid ends, Godzilla is still losing, but it takes a while. And high ends, Godzilla definitely draws the fight out and probably lands a couple decent hits on All Might, particularly with the atomic breath. That would definitely damage a prime All Might, but it would ultimately land with All Might knocking Godzilla unconscious. Now, as to what they do with Godzilla after he's unconscious, I'd say the most likely answer is they just kill him while he's unconscious, which they could probably do. Or they just throw him back in the ocean like they do in a bunch of other Godzilla films. I don't think they would do that. I think they'd just kill him after that, but whatever. Overall, I see All Might winning at least 9 times out of 10. The only time I really see Godzilla winning with any version of this scaling is if he lands lucky hits on All Might, which, as I've already explained, is not likely given the speed gap. So as to what would happen if Godzilla popped up in the My Hero Academia verse during All Might's prime, I think Godzilla is a pretty significant threat to most of the heroes, but once All Might arrives, it does end up being All Might winning the 1v1 confrontation between the two. But anyways, that's all. So if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing if you want. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.